Hello friends, my name is Marines, and today we're going to be talking about adaptations. Specifically, I'm starting a new series where I review a book and its adaptation, and we're starting with Interior Chinatown. The book is written by Charles Yu, and the first season of its adaptation is available on Hulu. I had not heard anything about this book or this TV show, but I am visiting my friend Nicole, and we often catch up on a couple of TV shows, and while we were thinking about what we could watch, she brought up this show specifically, and I went into it with absolutely no knowledge of what I was getting myself into. In its frame, Interior Chinatown is a satire about police procedurals, but more widely about the harmful way that Hollywood views Asian Americans. At its core, it is a story about identity. Those two things in combination allows the author Charles Yu to ask the question of what it means to define yourself, especially in a world that has a limited view of you. As we were watching the show, Nicole Googled something, as you do, and she was like, oh, this is based on a book. I was gonna say, I don't know how it passed me by because it did win the National Book Award, but it won, I believe, in 2020, and anything that happened in 2020, you know, if you missed it, the explanation is that you missed it in 2020. So this one completely passed me by, and I was so surprised to hear that it had won the National Book Award, and so I was immediately interested in reading the book. I did watch the TV show, then read the book in that order, but today we're going to talk about the book first, and then we'll talk about the show and what I look for in adaptations and whether or not this one was successful. The novel is written as a screenplay, and it follows our main character, Willis Wu, who is trapped in the roles that society, Hollywood, has dictated for him. He is background Oriental male, generic Asian man, and he yearns to be what he is told is the top of what he can achieve, which is Kung Fu guy. There are two sort of main settings, I would say. One is black and white, which is the story within the story. The procedural that Willis Wu is cast in. It is a cop show about a black man and his white partner as they go around solving crimes in Chinatown. The second setting is the Golden Palace, which is the restaurant in which Willis Wu works, and the building also is the home to a number of the other characters that we see. Interior Chinatown, the book, is super short. It is slim, it is tightly written, and because it is in that format of a screenplay, it tells the story that it tells with incredible economy. I found it incredibly moving. I found it darkly funny in the way where I was laughing with the book to keep from like crying about the things that it was exposing and satirizing. It is insightful in a quite devastating way, and I think that that is maintained by the concise format. Now, I did go through and look at other reviews, and one of the things that a lot of people who were in that 3-star range sort of said was that it was too concise, that it didn't go deep enough with the characters or do enough. But to me, I found it so effective that it really did not waste a word. It packed a punch because it was concise. And because it is satire, there is a way that it is on the nose, and I feel like too much of that could have diluted what it was saying or could have become wearing, but it knew when to call it quits. I think what often happens in the book is that those moments of characterization are quieter, and it can be outshined by the more in-your-face, like thematic content and humor, but there were so many small moments baked within scenes and sentences that I thought were well done. For instance, there's a moment where Willis is telling us about a karaoke night and about how his father loves to sing John Denver and Country Roads. It says, when he steps up and starts slaying Country Roads, try not to laugh, because by the time he gets to West Virginia, Mountain Mama, you're going to be singing along. And by the time he's done, you might understand why a 77-year-old guy from a tiny island in the Taiwan Strait who's been in a foreign country 2/3 of his life can nail a song, note perfect, about wanting to go home. The joke is, of course, about karaoke and the song choice, but baked into the sentence is the acceptance of the idea that this man would step up to do karaoke and people would laugh at him. It's a tiny moment in which there is humor about the karaoke and where the major sentiment is about immigration and home and longing to go home, but there is that bit of characterization there about this man like standing up to sing karaoke, being laughed at, that I found subtly peppered throughout the story and that really, really got me emotionally. That is what the story is doing. These characters fill roles that feel familiar to us who have consumed these kinds of stories and have been inundated with these stereotypes over and over again, and yet it reveals so much humanity and characterization in these quieter moments. Before we talk about the TV show, let's talk a little bit about adaptations and like what I personally look for in adaptations. I think that one of the least interesting ways that you can talk about an adaptation is through the lens of fidelity. And I know that is kind of easier said than done. It is also my knee-jerk reaction, especially with things that I love, with books that I love, to think about the adaptation in terms of how faithful it was. The thing that I always think of course, is Jane Austen and the argument about whether 1995 or 2005 is superior, and how people often cite that like 1995 is more faithful to the material, which as somebody who does prefer 95, I don't know is like 100%. So like it has more space. It is a miniseries versus a film, so there is just more space to adapt more of the book, but 95 takes its liberties as well. It makes decisions about what to keep and what to cut. It expands moments, expands dialogue, so it's also making these adaptation choices just in a format that allows it to do more. And I think that just sort of digging your heels into whether or not it was faithful is really boring in terms of this conversation. It also reminds me of Persuasion and how much hate the Netflix Persuasion got. I am a Netflix Persuasion truther. Sorry about it. But that is neither here nor there. We actually just did a podcast episode about Persuasion, and I found the two other Netflix Persuasion truthers, my co-host and one other person. No, but after she made that comment, I was like, Nicole, we've never done an episode on Persuasion, but like literally I cannot have a Netflix Persuasion hater on the episode. I cannot do it. And so here we are.
The three people who like the Netflix Persuasion gather around.
I'm gonna click on this podcast, Bish being like, yes, finally I'm gonna hear someone like vent about the Netflix Persuasion.
No,
sorry,
you're
it's not
wrong.
a safe place.
Not us.
So anyways, if you want to hear more about that, we do have that podcast episode available. But my point is that like fidelity is only one lens through which you can view an adaptation, and I don't necessarily think that it's the most interesting one. I think that an adaptation doesn't necessarily need to mirror the original, but it does need to understand it in order to be in conversation with it, and it also needs to understand its medium, right? If we're going from book to screen, what kind of screen, and what are the like limitations of that format, and how can that format also enhance what we've already gotten from the page? Okay, so let's talk about the TV show. First, I want to acknowledge that like the order that you read it in is always going to inform your experience. So I went into the TV show knowing absolutely nothing. I went into the book having the knowledge of the TV show. So I do recognize that, but I still think that the book was more immediately successful in like showing us the shape of the story. I think that the pilot episode of the TV show struggled a little bit to really tell us what we were experiencing. That's where the Googling came in, because after the pilot, there was still like a moment of like, what's happening here? And once you have the framing of this is a show about the background characters in a Law and Order-esque TV show, it's like, oh, I get it. So the pilot didn't do a good enough job setting that up. It did still sort of feel unmoored to me, but it was intriguing enough that I wanted to keep watching. Now it is a story that I do think builds. And I know, like I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that you have to stick it out. I do understand why the show isn't going to be for everybody and why people would bounce at certain points throughout the season, but I do think it is a show that builds. It builds in your understanding, it builds its characters, the humor also builds. It becomes sort of self-referential at some point where like there are reoccurring jokes and the laughs get louder each time. The more time I spent with it, the more it found its footing, the more I appreciated not only the story, but like what it was attempting. I love when shows or any media sort of take a chance, right? Or like do something that feels a little bit different. And this absolutely did feel like it was taking a big swing. Now, the show does depart pretty significantly from the plot of the book, and it's easy to understand why. We are dealing with a very short book, and one where the plot is sort of nebulous outside of the confines of like the setup or the format of the script. And so it was interesting to go back and read the book and see all of the places where they expanded and they changed. They had to take this very short book and make it a season's worth of TV. And I think that they made smart choices about like what characters to expand, what changes to make to our main character, where to spend more time, for instance, with Willis Wu's parents, with his mother, and building out her little side quest, which was one of my favorite parts of the TV show. Moving to the screen means that we can play with the visuals, right? There's that added element of now watching and also having people interpreting these roles and adding more just by the very fact of like putting a human in the role. I loved what it did visually to sort of indicate the changes between the procedural, the shifts in lighting, the way the music changed, and how it gave us these like very easy but satisfying running gags of comparing black and white to Law and Order, the music cues, the way we switch from scene to scene. I love when any show plays with the credits. And so if you give me like a changed credit sequence or a fake credit sequence, already plus 10 points. And this did play with the credits a couple of times. There was also a way that visually this reminded me a lot of video games. It was something to me that felt sort of like in the background or just kind of familiar, that solidifies as you understand the show more and as it continues to reveal. There were also a number of action sequences throughout that I enjoyed, I thought were really well done. I think that in addition to some of the unevenness in the pacing and some of the unevenness in trying to communicate like the shape of the story, there was also a way that in like expanding for the format and in giving us more character moments, you kind of lose a little bit of the clarity of the thesis statement of what exactly this is trying to say. And I think that that probably stands out more to me because I read the book. When you compare these two, I think that they are very interesting in conversation with each other, and I think that each does something stronger than the other. The book is more clear-eyed about its thesis statement, about what it's doing and saying, and the TV show gives you more of an opportunity to sit with these characters and to have like that depth in characterization. I will add here something about both formats, and it is that I loved the satirical approach to police procedurals. You have probably heard me talk about this in some way, shape, or form because I talk about it all of the time. Procedurals are some of my comfort media, and I'm often like thinking very deeply about this, about why, because procedurals are often built on the back of propaganda, and I always want to be very like critical of that and of what I'm consuming. I think a lot about like what appeals to me in a procedural, and I think part of it is the same reason that romances appeal to me, and it is like the guarantee beat for beat that like soothes my brain. I think that there is also something worth exploring in terms of society's ideas about justice and our collective dreaming of or like romanticizing of this idea that in the end evil loses and that there is like a clear-cut justice to be had, and also like, I don't know, the dream that our justice system works, right? I think that there is something there to really think about, in addition to recognizing that oftentimes these works are works of propaganda. I've thought about all of that a lot, but I appreciate this piece of satire for making me sit with this idea that procedurals are also built on the back of the exploitation of these side characters, of the dead bodies. It is similar to what I have thought about in terms of like superhero movies and the collateral damage that we often gloss over in order to paint these people as heroes. You can't focus in too much on all of the people dying around these heroes, and I feel like that is probably true for the procedural as well. Like, you can't sit too long with the people in the background in order to make a procedural really work. And I appreciate the story for going, well, no, actually, let's think about them. Both the book and the show carry a dreamlike sort of quality. There's this towing of the line between the fiction within the fiction that is this show, Black and White, and like the way that we keep being jarred out of that to be like, no, but these are real people. This is our real character, Willis Wu. And like the interweaving of all of that and the way that we'll be in a moment where Willis is trying to assert himself and understand who he is as a person, and he's being dragged back to being an extra on the show. It creates the most interesting sort of weird little atmosphere. There's also a piece of this that I think, in particularly reading the book, I started to have questions about like the handling of the Black character, the Black cop in Black and White, mostly because there was like black and white and there were these Asian side characters, and it felt like it wasn't fully contending with blackness and the role of blackness when we're talking about typecasting and Hollywood and all of those things. But the book did go on to like deal with that in a way that was satisfying, because I had this thought of like, hey man, and then the book does it as well. I think the show tries to have these moments, especially building out this character and having him sort of question his role in all of this and like explore his wants and wishes and dreams and agency. So I think that that added a layer, and I think the book more directly talks about race while Yu continues to like stay in his lived experience and in his lane in a way that I thought was very well balanced. So for me, Interior Chinatown, neither the book nor the TV show are without its fault, but they are both deeply ambitious, very thought-provoking, and very human. So if you're looking for something bold and different, if you enjoy sort of meta commentary and humor, and if you're looking for a short book to either break up other reading or fit in some reading goals, I do recommend Interior Chinatown. Or if you're somebody who enjoys procedurals and would enjoy a satire of that, or enjoy ambitious TV shows, things that feel and look a little bit different, I would also recommend trying out the first season of Interior Chinatown. And if within the first couple of episodes you're still curious to keep watching, I do think that it pays off in the end. That's it for me today. If you have watched or read or are interested in Interior Chinatown, let's chat down in the comments. If you have ideas for what you would like me to cover in this new series where I talk about adaptations, also let me know down in the comments. As always, if you would like to support me and my work, the easiest way to do so is to follow the link in the description or up on the screen to my bindery, which you can follow for free. Or if you are interested, you can also subscribe for $5 a month for bonus content. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.
I feel very like Netflix persuasion, get behind me, I'll protect you.